I understand you've got some prerogatives.
Well, I think in the case of an accusation of false statement, I will briefly. Brian Terry's mother and father were told by a law enforcement official that they believed there was a third gun. The missing number that was later explained seemed to corroborate it. Ultimately, though, 3 people have reported that they were told there was a third weapon. Now, we don't know there was or wasn't. Justice has not confirmed whether or not there's a ballistic match on the 2 Fast and Furious weapons there, nor have they confirmed they're looking for an additional weapon or additional shooter. I take very seriously getting the facts right. The fact is we report in a limited basis things which, in this case, the press was way ahead of, and we said, yes, we're looking into it. We did, and I will admit, we did and do get things wrong during an investigation. We do go down blind alleys regularly. Certainly, that's the case. Today's hearing and the 1,300 pages out of 6,000 that were directly related to response to a false statement made to us in writing on February 4th is an example where a lot of time has been spent going down a false thing. The gentleman, though, is correct, and this Chairman will admit, during this investigation for more than a year, there have been times in which we did not get the information right. So while correcting you, I'm not going to say we get it all right. Our goal is to get it all right before we publish, and hopefully each of our publications, majority and minority, is where we make sure we only state that which we can substantiate with footnotes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We now go to the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Attorney General, I want to make sure I understand your testimony today and the facts as well. You've indicated today that you were not aware of any gun walking at all until you were briefed, and it looks like 2001, that would have been either January or February of 2011?
Yeah, January, February 2011.
And you're specifically speaking of gun walking, not just Fast and Furious?
No, I didn't become aware of Fast and Furious until about the same time period.
Okay, so you were not aware of any gun walking, including wide receiver, prior to the end of January of 2011?
No, I learned of wide receiver actually later on. I became aware of wide receiver as we were preparing documents that were to be submitted to this committee.
And without regard to Mr. Weinstein's memo, which you were not aware of, so you did not know anything about wide receiver. I just want to make sure that that's clear.
No.
So when you said earlier that you were not aware of the term Fast and Furious being used, were you aware at the time of Mr. Terry's death of any investigation or program that was going on as a result of his death?
As a result of his death, I certainly was aware of the fact that there was an investigation into who killed him. There was a criminal investigation that started right at the time of his death, December 14th, 15th. I was aware of that.
And in fact, you testified today that you were notified the date of his death. Is that correct?
Yes.
And was that by Mr. Wilkinson?
I don't know. I'm not sure who told me.
If I might refresh your recollection, because in pursuant to some of the documents that we received Friday evening, we did receive some emails, and one of which was an email sent on December 15th. It was an email exchange that began with, from somebody to Dennis Burke, your U.S. Attorney in Arizona at the time, said, "Our agent has passed away." Dennis Burke then forwarded that to Monty Wilkinson, who was acting as your Deputy Attorney, Chief of Staff, I believe, at the time.
Deputy Chief of Staff. Right.
On December 15th at 9:41 a.m., Mr. Burke said, "Not good, 18 miles within." Thereafter, at 10:04 that morning, your Deputy Chief of Staff, Monty Wilkinson, then said in an email to Mr. Burke, "Tragic. I've alerted the AG, the acting DAG, Lisa, etc." Would it then be correct to assume that the way you learned of Brian Terry's death was from Mr. Wilkinson's himself as a result of his statement that he notified you?
Well, he notified me, but I'm saying it's entirely possible that I knew about it before Monty told me.
Okay, and so you'd have no reason to dispute that Monty told you about it?
Yeah, I suppose he did, but I'm just saying that when it comes to that kind, a law enforcement death, especially involving a federal law enforcement officer, that's the kind of information that gets to me very, very quickly.
And it should.
From a variety of places.
And in fact, to follow up on that, in the email exchange, later at 11:15 a.m. that morning, there was another email from Mr. Wilkinson to Dennis Burke saying, "Please provide any additional details as they become available to you," asking the U.S. Attorney in Arizona, "Please tell us, Mr. Attorney, U.S. Attorney, we want to know more." Later that day, in an email from Mr. Burke, the U.S. Attorney in Arizona, to Mr. Wilkinson, your Deputy Chief, "The guns found in the desert near the murdered BP officer connect back to the investigation we were going to talk about. They were AK-47s purchased at a Phoenix gun store. My question to you, Mr. Attorney General, were you aware of this email exchange? Were you aware of an investigation ongoing that involved a Phoenix gun store and specifically AK-47s at the time?
No, I wasn't. But what's interesting, you got to listen to what you just said. He said that we were going to talk about. We were going to talk about, which implies that they did not talk about.
Not prior to, but subsequent to. Subsequent to the death. Mr. Wilkinson has already told you about Brian Terry's death. Now he's being informed about an investigation involving the slain officer, involving a gun store in Phoenix. Did that not raise any sense of awareness? Did it not raise any sense of intrigue? If not from Mr. Wilkinson, at least from you to say, what investigation then is ongoing?
I was not told about this. I was unaware of this. And unless there was some indication that
I appreciate that, but you've testified today that you are a hands-on manager.
What I was saying was that unless there's some indication that the tactics that we are so against were employed there, all we know is that this was a tragic event connected to an ongoing investigation. But we don't have
involving a gun store and an AK-47. What else do we have to say? Involving a cartel? I mean, come on. From December 15th until the end of January, you don't learn about a gun-walking operation ongoing in your department? And I'm supposed to go home and tell my constituency that that's the facts? Mr. Attorney General, I have a hard time believing that. And if you are responsible for those underneath your direction, I would assume that those underneath your direction would make sure you are fully informed of all incidents of significance, including an ongoing investigation that resulted, subsequent to an agent's death.
Right. What I would say is that in the absence of an indication that these inappropriate tactics were used, you have here a tragic death connected to an ongoing federal matter, an ongoing investigation. Unfortunately, that happens all the time, too many times. What makes this case, this situation unique are the inappropriate tactics. And I don't think there's any indication that Mr. Wilkinson or anybody else was aware of these tactics until the January-February timeframe, late January, early February timeframe. That is the...
So you made no inquiry as to whether this investigation involved gun walking?
I'm sorry?
You made no inquiry as to the investigation involving Brian Terry's death involved gun walking?
That information was not brought to my attention, so I would not have the ability...
But you made no inquiry.
The
I'm not
gentleman's
asking
time
who
has
brought your
expired.
attention. You yourself made no inquiry with regard to that.
There was no indication, there was no basis for us to believe that gun walking was at all a part of any of this stuff. I didn't know anything about gun walking or the use of that technique until February. And by February the 28th and early March, I said, guess what? We're not doing gun walking. It took me a month or less than a month to say that gun walking was inappropriate. Brought to my attention, fairly rapid response to say, don't ever do this again.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentlelady from California, Ms. Spear, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you to over here, Attorney General. It's the last person on the totem pole, so to speak.
Should be moving up in future years.
Don't count on it. In any case, first of all, let me say that I think we can stipulate for the record that this hideous chapter in the Attorney General's office, dating back to 2006, is one that we never want to see repeated. But I think it's important for us to recognize that this has been going on for a long time. And but for the death of Agent Terry, would it still be going on today? And that's one of the things that continues to trouble me. For the record, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask unanimous consent to put into the record a memo provided to then Attorney General Mukasey in November of 2007, in which it specified to him, of particular importance, ATF has recently worked jointly with Mexico on the first ever attempt to have controlled delivery of weapons being smuggled into Mexico by a major arms trafficker. While the first attempts at the controlled delivery have not been successful, the investigation is ongoing, and ATF would like to expand the possibility of such joint investigations and controlled deliveries.
I'm more than happy to have that piece of discovery placed in the record. No objection.
Thank you. Attorney General, were you ever told about General Mukasey's briefing regarding controlled deliveries, another word for gun walking?
I didn't find out about that until late in this process as we were developing documents to submit to this committee with regard to Operation Wide Receiver. I didn't know it before that.
All right. This committee is government oversight and reform. So I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on the reform side. Hopefully, we are not just having these hearings to continue to beat up on what is an atrocious chapter in our history, but how do we make sure that it doesn't happen again? So speak to me about the fact that we do not have a federal statute on gun trafficking.
We have a tool. We don't have a tool that we really need. We need to have an ability to say that gun trafficking is inappropriate, it's wrong, and that there's a federal criminal penalty for it. And a statute can be drawn in such a way that it is respectful of the Second Amendment rights that all Americans enjoy. What I'm talking about are people who are doing things for criminal, illicit purposes that put the American people at risk and put at risk our colleagues, our neighbors south of the border in Mexico.
What other things do we need in place to avoid this kind of activity? From your own testimony, you said that you can trace 60,000 weapons, but that's just a small percentage of what's really being trafficked from the United States into Mexico.
Well, I think that's right. 64,000 weapons have been traced from the United States to Mexico, but those are the ones that have been traced. There are a substantially greater number of guns that have not been traced. We need to have a statute that will make meaningful what I think is a crime, straw purchasing, and make meaningful a penalty for people who engage in straw purchasing to get around the rules that this Congress has enacted and that I am charged with enforcing. We need to have an ATF head who is confirmed. It is great to hear the chairman say that he would support that. There are other management changes that we have made, and as I said before, that are consistent with the minority report, and I think that you all have done a really good job in making that list. There are actually a couple that we didn't think of that I'm looking at, and I think that we will try to implement as well. There are a whole variety of things that can be done in a way that if we are truly going to put partisan concerns aside, put lobbying concerns aside, and have some courage, because it will take some courage, because this will not be universally approved. We can really make a difference in the lives of the American people and protect the lives of law enforcement officers.
Have you developed a statute that you could provide to the committee around penalizing straw purchasers and gun trafficking?
I can check with our legislative affairs folks and see exactly what it is that we have there. As I indicated before, Congresswoman Maloney and Congressman Cummings have actually put something on paper that I think is a good place for us to start. But I can also check and see what it is that we have and that we can share with this committee. All
right. I would appreciate that. My time has expired.
I thank the gentlelady. I now ask unanimous consent that discovery documents HOGR DOJ 0057, 52, 53, and 54 be placed into the record along with the gentlelady's documents from earlier, just immediately before. These show Lanny Brewer lobbying for gun walking in a coordinated fashion across the border to be for people to be arrested in Mexico on February 4th. Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, I just reserve because I don't think that accurately describes that document.
Well, the document speaks
for
itself.
He's not talking about gun walking. I thought he was talking about a coordinated effort with the Mexican government to follow those guns and then some cooperative effort to
which is what
pick them up. Not let them just walk.
Well, but right. Well, okay. The definition of gun walking, the definition of gun walking, which the minority has chosen to put on wide receiver. Wide receiver was a coordinated effort where they followed to the border the guns. The problem with wide receiver, and the reason it had to be abandoned, is they found that as it crossed the border, repeatedly they lost control of the guns. The program described here by Mr. Brewer, in the email related to Mr. Brewer, is exactly the same program. Now, maybe if you do something enough times, you might get it different in the outcome, but the program, the attempt to follow from the store, to the border and then pass off to Mexican authorities is, in fact, wide receiver. That was that program, which differs from Fast and Furious, where Fast and Furious, they told people to peel away and they'd find the guns later. There is a distinct difference, but there is no difference between what this document shows and the stated wide receiver. Fact is, Lanny Brewer in this document was clearly trying to say, let's do wide receiver again, but let's get it right this time.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve. I'd just like to see the document.
You have the document. This is DOJ 005754.
I'd just like to see it. You can go ahead. You can go ahead.
No, you've reserved. I'll wait.
Here's the clock. Oh, good.
Mr. Chairman, again, I think we have a differing opinion of what gun walking is, and I'll withdraw my reservation.
I thank the gentleman, and you're right. We can disagree as to what the document means. My discussion was what I believe it means, but you're absolutely right. Ms. Spear and myself could both be wrong about what the document means, but I appreciate your allowing it to be placed in the record. I'll give that to the member. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that DOJ 0058 and 11 and 12 be placed in the record, but I will reserve myself until the minority has a chance to see it and be comfortable with it. And with that, we now go to the gentleman from Texas who has patiently been waiting down in the cheap seats, Mr. Farenthold.
Thank you very much, Chairman Issa. Mr. Attorney General, I want to follow up on something Mr. Ross says, because I think we're looking at management and how the DOJ is managed. I think you told him that you were informed about Agent Terry's death, but never heard anything back about it being associated with the guns that walked. I'm the kind of person, maybe our management styles are different, that if an employee under my charge was killed in the line of duty, I would want to be briefed almost on a daily basis as to how that investigation is going. And so I just am asking again, you didn't hear for quite some time that the Fast and Furious guns were involved in this?
Well, no, that's correct. I didn't hear about that for a while. I mean, you know, to draw a distinction here, and I'm almost hesitant to do this, we are talking about a brave law enforcement officer. Well, it wasn't a part, that doesn't matter. I was brought up to date about, you know, the ongoing investigation, what we were doing at the Justice Department, but did not hear anything about the connection between that death and the gun-walking tactics until, as I said, February of 2011.
All right. Well, you know, we've been investigating Fast and Furious for some time. Y'all have been looking at it internally. You've constantly blamed the ATF or the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona. I think Mr. Gowdy has made it clear through some of his questions that it actually has gone up to Maine Justice. But I just don't see y'all doing anything. There have been several questions earlier about what you've done, and nobody's been disciplined, and nobody's been fired. There hadn't even been a letter put in. I don't think that's good management, and I think that's the reason that many of my colleagues, myself included, have suggested it might be time for you to resign. My question is that knowing what you know about the handling of Operation Fast and Furious, do you believe you're capable of running the top law enforcement agency in this country? And can you tell the taxpayers that you're the most qualified person to manage the Department of Justice?
First off, let me just say, I have not blamed the people in Phoenix, either ATF or the U.S. Attorney's Office there. I mean, they're good people down there. They work hard, and I'm not going to allow that to stand in the record. I'm not blaming anybody. We want to find out who in those offices might have been responsible, as well as who in Maine Justice is responsible.
Well, don't you think 13 months is a little long to run that investigation?
You got to understand something. I don't have the ability to do a top-to-bottom investigation here because of the Inspector General's investigation, and I've got to respect that. Now, with regard to my capacities to run this department, you know, I'll let the record speak for itself. People have a different view, different views in this room about Fast and Furious and my role in it.
And okay, let me move on. I just have a limited amount of time. You've indicated.
Well, you ask a question. Okay. I mean, questioning whether or not I should resign. I don't have a chance to respond.
All right, that's fine.
Thank you. Now, so if you're going to judge me and ask me to resign, as you have, and has some of your colleagues, you know, you've asked a broad question. And how do you judge that? Well, you look at everything that I've done in this department for the past 3 years, and you look at the department in the state that it was in when I got here. A dispirited department that had gone through scandals, that had the traditions of the department turned on its head. It had been politicized. I will stand on what I've done with regard to the criminal division, the antitrust division, with regard to the civil division and the fraud money that we brought in, the great work we've done on national security. And if you want to say that I'm a person not qualified to be Attorney General, you take that into account as well.
All right, then why are we withholding some of the deliberative documents, too? That's another one of my concerns. Really, a lot of times here in Washington, it's not what actually happens that you get hung on. It's the cover-up. So, you know, I'm concerned that some of those documents are going to show some of the theories that have been floated around, that maybe some delays were put on stopping Fast and Furious based on some of the things the people on the other side of the aisle are calling for now, and additional and more stricter laws. I mean, if there was a political purpose to that, I think the American people have a right to know about that. So I would urge you to release those documents, let us look at them, and let the American people make that decision. But I'm almost out of time, and I've learned from the testimony here that things tend not to bubble up to your desk very often. I did want to make sure that you were aware of an operation with the DEA that has 2 Houston, Texas-based pilots being detained in Panama over money laundering. I realize that's out of the scope of this investigation. You can choose to comment on it or not, but I did want to make sure it bubbled up to your level. And my time has expired.
I thank the gentleman yield.
Yes.
Just quickly, the minority is not objecting to the Cole document from March 10, 2011, so that is placed in the record. I thank the gentleman. And with that, we go.
Did you wish to answer? That's what you're welcome to or not.
Yeah, you certainly may respond.
There's a limited amount of information I can talk about that. The DEA leadership has told my staff that the incident you described in your letter was not a DEA operation. I can't respond much more than that, but DEA can provide your staff a briefing with regard to that outside of this setting.
That's fine. I'm just worried about the pilots.
That's fine. Sure.
I thank the Attorney General. On December 5th, we actually asked for a briefing on that. We appreciate your commitment to that briefing in an appropriate setting. Now we go to the very patient gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Attorney General Holder, for once again coming before the committee. Our job on this committee is oversight. It is to examine the facts and come to conclusions. People of good faith may disagree. Reasonable people can look at the same evidence and come to different conclusions. In this case, we're not looking at evidence and then coming to conclusions. Rather, the majority is not looking at evidence and coming to conclusions. The majority came to a conclusion before any facts were examined, before any evidence was produced, before any witnesses were given the opportunity to testify. And that conclusion was that there was a scandal that the majority could exploit for political gain, an Obama administration scandal that could garner the majority the splashy headlines they promised when they took control of this committee. Remember now, this was when the chairman of this committee promised the American people that he would hold 7 hearings a week times 40 weeks. These plans weren't reflective of actual evidence, of actual facts already gathered that would determine the number and pace of hearings. This was at a time when flush with victory, the majority began to display the hubris that would be their hallmark for the last 13 months.
Would the gentleman yield?
Not yet. This was at a time when the incoming chairman of the committee said that President Obama has been one of the most corrupt presidents in modern times. Since then, we have sat through politicized hearing after politicized hearing, and we have seen the majority level wild accusations against the administration with absolutely no basis in fact. We have watched the majority berate witnesses. We have heard the majority accuse witnesses of lying. We have seen the majority attempt to deny us the right to call our own witnesses. And we have seen what we see here once again today. The majority has been and is accusing the administration, the Justice Department, the Attorney General of participating in a vast conspiracy. The chairman has compared the Fast and Furious operation with Iran-Contra. This was a completely irresponsible comparison. Iran-Contra was indeed a vast conspiracy, one that reached directly to the Oval Office, and evidence proved that. It is irresponsible to take that gavel, to assume the grave responsibility of leading this committee, and to wield the power to subpoena, the power to call and examine witnesses, the power to investigate like a political instrument, solely like a political instrument. To accuse the AG of, no, I won't repeat the irresponsible, wholly manufactured accusation, but to do so without evidence is irresponsible. Now, there is evidence. Fast and Furious was a fatally flawed operation. We know that from the evidence. We also know from the evidence that an attorney general knew about flawed, failed gun walking operation. We know this from the documents produced by the Justice Department. However, that was Attorney General Mukasey in President Bush's administration. So we have evidence of knowledge at the highest level of the Justice Department about a bad, flawed policy. Does the majority call former Attorney General Mukasey to testify? Does the majority examine the full history of these operations in a fair and responsible manner? Does the majority even attempt to avoid the appearance that this is a politically motivated attack? I think from the evidence, we know the answer to those questions. And, Mr. Chairman, I will now yield the balance of my time to the ranking member.
Okay, the ranking member has
Yield
5
to the
seconds.
ranking member.
Mr. Chairman, in light of the latitude that you've given on your side, I would just ask for 2 minutes onto the gentleman's side. Unanimous consent. I think you've been very.
I would ask unanimous. I would, any objections? Without objection, the gentleman from Missouri has an additional 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I want to look at this organizational chart, Attorney General, and I see that every single person with immediate supervisory responsibility for Operation Fast and Furious has been removed or reassigned. Let's look at ATF. Here are the people that have been removed from their management positions and from any operational roles: the director, the deputy director, the assistant director, the deputy assistant director, the special agent in charge, the assistant special agent in charge, and the group supervisor. Is that right?
I think I can't see the bottom of the chart, but I think that's all accurate.
Similarly, at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona, all of the key personnel involved in Fast and Furious have resigned, been removed, or been reassigned United States Attorney, the criminal chief, section head, line prosecutor. Is that right?
I believe that's all correct as well.
One of the criticisms is that no one has been actually fired. Can you explain why you are waiting to take final personnel actions against some of these employees?
Well, I don't want to single those people out because the universe is actually larger than that, but certainly one of the things that I'm going to take into consideration is what we find from the Inspector General report and what factual findings that she makes, in addition to the material that I've just gotten, I guess, over the past couple of days, the minority report. I think the Chairman's right. There are a couple of majority reports I should look at as well before I make final determinations.
Would a confirmed director of ATF be able to improve management supervision?
I don't think there's any question about that. Again, Todd Jones has done a great job, and he has put in place a great number of reforms and has done a lot of the things that you are pointing up to there on the ATF side. But I think you need to have a person with the prestige of a Senate confirmation to really run an agency in the way that we would like it to be run.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and I thank you for making my point that no one in Washington has been held accountable. And with that, we go to the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm over here, Attorney General.
Oh, okay.
Another cheap seat, I'm afraid.
It's not that cheap.
You will move up, though.
I hope so. Hey, the real reason we're here today, and I appreciate you being here. I know you've gone through a lot of questioning. And the fact that it's not a political hearing, I understand that, but I'm getting a little bit confused because we keep going back to the political side of it. To me, this is about trust. And you're the highest-ranking law enforcement official in the country. And when the people lose trust in an agency, that's a very difficult thing to recover, if you can recover it at all. And I go back to a couple quotes, and these are ones you'll recognize. One is transparency is the best thing. That's from you, by the way, in January of 2009. For a long time now, there's been too much secrecy in this city. Let me say it as simply as I can. Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency. So we always hear this talk about, we're going to be transparent, we're going to be clear. And then the only thing that I hear, that I'm clear on, is that you were never informed of any of these things. No matter what it was, you know what, I never was informed. And I'm not questioning your management style. I come from an industry that if you lose somebody's confidence, it's very hard to get it back. Now, we can keep talking about this for a long time. What I'm amazed about is that since 2009, 2010, 2011, there's very little information about what happened. When we go back to 2006 and a previous administration, we can very clearly demonstrate what they did and what they did not do. And what I'm really bothered by is a letter from the Department of Justice, and we've already made reference to it. And this is to Senator Grassley. This responds to your letters dated January 27, 2011 and January 31, 2011 to Acting Director Kenneth Nelson of the Department's Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, Explosives, ATF, regarding Project Gunrunner. We appreciate your strong support for the Department's law enforcement. At the outset, the allegation described in your January 27th letter that ATF sanctioned or otherwise knowingly allowed the sale of assault weapons to a straw purchaser who then transported them to Mexico is false. ATF makes every effort to interdict weapons that have been purchased illegally. And then, on that very same day, below is a synopsis of Assistant Attorney General Lanny Brewer's meetings with the Mexican Attorney General's office, Mexico's federal police, and the Secretary of Foreign Relations. Now, who else is there? AG Brewer, Deputy Chief of Mission, John Feely, from the State Department, DAAG Blanco, Kevin Sudwell. All these folks are here, and at the end of it, here's what they come up with. AAG Brewer told Ventura that there had been a proposed increase in the U.S. sentencing or guidelines for straw purchasers. AAG Brewer suggested that a letter from the SRE or PGR in support of increased sentencing guidelines for straw purchases may be useful. The proposed cross-border operation, AAG Brewer suggested allowing straw purchasers cross into Mexico so SSP can arrest and PGR can convict and prosecute these folks. Such coordinated operations between the U.S. and Mexico may send a strong message to arms traffickers. And now, it is preposterous for me to sit here and listen that you, as the highest-ranking law enforcement officer in the country, said, but I didn't know. I didn't know. And see, that's the problem. I just didn't know. Had I known, I would have changed it. And had I known earlier, I wouldn't have waited until December 2nd of this year to pull the message that Brewer had sent. I would have allowed the February 4th letter, 2011, to be entered into it. Don't you see where the problem is, Mr. Attorney General? It isn't that you say, I didn't know or I wasn't quite aware of it. The problem is the American public relies on you, sir, to follow all those guidelines. You are the chief officer. And then to come before this body and for us then to be accused of some type of a political agenda, this isn't a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. This is a United States of America issue. So you have your AAG down in Mexico saying, yeah, this is a good idea, we're going to keep doing it. And then you have the people back home saying, you know what, we never did that, and we don't want it to go on. Is there any wonder then that the American people have lost trust and lost faith in this system? Absolutely not. The fact that they still hang on to a thread of it goes back to what they know the country was to be in the beginning and what it still can be. But when you continue to find out that those who are responsible don't do their work, and at the end of the day, they don't say, you know, what happened to my watch, it's my fault. What they say is, it happened in the previous administration, and doggone it, the people who are supposed to brief me never briefed me. I can't believe that the transition from the last administration to this administration, there was no briefing. I mean, there may have been the AGs may have turned, but I bet you the same people were still on. And so to say that we really didn't know about it, to me is absolutely preposterous, and that's something that I can't accept. And if you go back to Northwest Pennsylvania, you know what integrity is? It's saying what you mean and meaning what you say, and don't run around the outsides of it. Go right to the middle and tell people what happened. You know what? I would appreciate you saying, you know what? I didn't have the foggiest idea what was going on. I went after the people that handled it and handled it poorly, and they're no longer involved.
Gentleman's time has expired. We go to the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Kucinich, for 5 minutes. Mr. Attorney General, we're going to get you close to 1 o'clock. We're down to about 6 people left. Go ahead, Mr. Kucinich.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I want you to know, Attorney General, sorry I'm late to this hearing, but I was, my wife and I were at the prayer breakfast this morning, and I knew this meeting started at 9. We were still at the prayer breakfast, and we were praying for you. And I want you to know that
I can't complain about that.
Well, let me tell you, based on what I've seen, I think my prayers have been answered. Because, frankly, I haven't seen anyone make a case about you not performing your duties in the way that you should. And I want to go over that right now. You and senior Justice Department officials have repeatedly been accused of authorizing the gun-walking tactics used in Fast and Furious. You know, we already have the record about what my chairman has said. He said there's no question that high-ranking officials at Justice were briefed and rebriefed, and many of them had direct contacts in authorizing the program. They now call it a failed program, when in fact the very concept, the very way they wanted it to be executed was deadly and dangerous, unquote. Now, none of the 22 witnesses that this committee has interviewed supported that claim. And I want to look at the, for the moment, the Department of Justice organizational chart, which is relevant here. Of course, you know, the DOJ, you're at the top. ATF reports to you through the Deputy Attorney General. The former head of the ATF, and I emphasize the word former, Kenneth Melson, told us that the controversial tactics were never raised to my level. He said he was not aware of gun walking and never brought it to the attention of senior DOJ officials. Now, Mr. Melson's second in command, William Hoover, also told the committee staff he did not know of the gun walking tactics in Fast and Furious. He said it was his firm belief, and that's a quote, firm belief that the strategic and tactical decisions made in this investigation were born and raised, unquote, in Phoenix. Now, Mr. Attorney General, can you corroborate their statements to the committee? And did the head of ATF or his deputy ever warn you that gun walking was occurring?
No, I never got that from either Mr. Melson or from Mr. Hoover.
Well, I want to go back over this chart again, because it's really important for members to have an understanding here. You've got the U.S. Attorney in Arizona, the ATF. Take with the ATF, Mr. Hoover, Mr. Melson. ATF didn't report anything to the Deputy Attorney General, the U.S. Attorney, and for the District of Arizona didn't put any information through to the Deputy Attorney General. So what I want to know is, all of this talk about resignation, we're really devaluing the whole concept of asking a top-level official to resign when you haven't reached the level of proof that something was right on his desk. No one's proved that at all. But we keep talking about resignation. If we cheapen this whole idea of just, you don't like someone, you ask them to resign, you don't like an administration, you ask people to quit, you cheapen that idea. It makes this whole committee process less significant. And I want this committee to be important. I chose to be on this committee when I first came to Congress because government oversight is a very important function. I want to support my chair's call for this hearing, even though it's the 6th hearing. You must feel like Tom Hanks in the movie Groundhog's Day, because we keep coming to the same point. But, you know what? You have an obligation to come to us, nevertheless. So, look at that chart. Hold that up again, please. All this information, all these assertions, they never got to the Attorney General. Now, why, whether you like them or not, you've got to be able to make the case. And the case has not been made here that the Attorney General, Eric Holder, was in any way derelict in his duties. And those on the other side of the aisle know me well enough that if I thought that he was, I wouldn't hesitate to say it. So I think that we've got to be very careful here with people's reputations, because reputations take a lifetime to build. They can't just be trashed in a minute without facts. After a while, this is starting to sound like Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass, where you've got the Queen saying sentence first, verdict afterwards. The sentence is resignation, resign. But we haven't made a fact pattern that would suggest that we should have that conclusion raised to the level of the President having to take the action, because you serve at the pleasure of the President. So I just want to say, whatever disagreements that we may have on certain policies, I don't see anything that's been produced here today that should cause you to have to stop serving the people of the United States of America. And I just want that on the record. Haven't seen the facts that would show otherwise. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Idaho, Mr. Labrador, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'm glad that the minority has made a point that I've been trying to make for a long time. Government is too big and has too many layers of bureaucracy. But I'm one of the first people who asked for your resignation, and I did it after thinking about it for a long time. And in my statement, when I asked for your resignation, I said that in your testimony before Congress, you either lied or you were grossly incompetent in your actions when it came to finding out about Fast and Furious and your handling of this matter. The reason we keep bringing you back to Congress is because we want to know what you knew and when you knew it. It's a simple question. But the problem is that even though you have testified 6 times, apparently, on this matter in different occasions, your story continues to evolve and continues to change. In fact, today, your story changed a little bit. So let's talk about the facts. Everybody wants the facts, so let's talk about the facts here. On May of 2011, you said in the Senate Judiciary that you first heard about Fast and Furious a few weeks ago. In November of 2011, you said that a few weeks was inaccurate and that you should have said a couple of months. Emails released on January 28th show that you were informed by your Deputy Chief of Staff of Agent Terry's death, and you just testified today that, yes, that is correct, on December 15th, 2011. And this is what I'm trying to get to right here. On that same date, and it's already been shown, your Deputy Chief of Staff learned that the guns used to kill Agent Terry were from Fast and Furious. So what you want us to believe is that you were told about the death of Agent Terry, but you chose not to ask any follow-up questions on that same day about what caused the death of Agent Terry, and that, in fact, you didn't learn about the connection between the death of Agent Terry and Fast and Furious until a couple of months later. That's what you want us to believe, and that's fine. That may be the truth. But you continue to come to Congress. That may be the truth. That's fine. I don't have a problem with it. You continue to come to Congress unprepared. Don't you agree that this is a pattern that you have of dealing with difficult questions and embarrassing issues in your office, continuing to come to Congress unprepared?
I think it's very interesting what you just said. That may be the truth. What I said may be the truth.
Yeah, it may be the truth. I'm not disputing it. I'm saying, but you continue to come to Congress unprepared. Wouldn't you admit that you continue to come to Congress unprepared when you have to testify? Where you have to change your statements, you have to withdraw memos from your office. Isn't that a fact?
No.
Okay, let's look at that. Let's look at the facts. If we could go to the slides, please. When you came to Congress on February 14th of 2001, you were being asked about Mr. Mark Rich's pardon.
Oh.
And it says, Mr. Rich's name was unfamiliar to me. I had gained only a passing familiarity with the underlying facts of the Rich case. Go to the next slide. I did not acquaint myself with his record. Let's go to the next slide. I never actually saw that letter. There's a pattern here that we continue to hear in your testimony. Let's go to the next slide. You're right.
Mr. Chairman, you said at the beginning that this would be limited to Fast and Furious, and here we are. I'm seeing something up there from 2001.
I'm just showing a pattern of behavior.
Yeah, we've honored that, and I've been very strict with my people on this side to stay within the parameters that the Senate Chairman set. And as a matter of fact, I thought we've done a pretty good job so far.
But gentlemen will suspend. I'm going to limit what he can do to anything he wants to say related to management style, and the Attorney General does not have to answer any questions. I don't actually see a question here. I have heard time and time again people talking about gun control and the need for it and a number of other items. Expressing an opinion within the 5 minutes by a member of Congress is something I have limited authority. The gentleman has only 5 minutes. I do not expect the Attorney General to answer, although in defending himself in this case he may choose to, and I would caution the gentleman from Idaho to get to the management question quickly because this is about Fast and Furious.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Next slide. You're right. I didn't have the ability to look at all the materials. Next slide, please. I have not had a chance on May 13th of 2010 when you were testifying about Fast and Furious. I have not had a chance to. I've glanced at it. I have not read it. Next slide, please. I have no recollection of knowing about Fast and Furious on October 7th, 2011. Next slide, please. On October 7th of 2011, on a weekly basis, my office typically receives over 100 pages and weekly reports that are provided. Next slide, please. I certainly never knew about the tactics employed in the operation. Next slide, please. And this is on February 14th of 2001, and I think the one thing that would have changed this whole thing is if I had said to the person on my staff, what's the status of the Rich matter? I believe that's what would have changed, and we would have avoided the 6 hearings that we have had about this matter, is if you would have just asked a simple question of your staff before you came to testify in Congress. What did we know about Fast and Furious, and when did we know it? You failed to do that. You failed to do that under the Mark Rich investigation, and you failed to do it at this case, and this is why we continue to have these hearings. Mr. Attorney General, I believe the American people deserve better. I believe that the American people deserve to have an Attorney General that they can trust, and for that reason I have asked for your resignation, and I believe that because you have been grossly incompetent in the way that you have prepared before coming to Congress, I think you should resign. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, I just want to note for the record, this gentleman could have had a whole pattern that begins with Fast and Furious, but he insisted upon going back to 10 years. It was a violation of the rule you yourself, Mr. Chairman, set, and
Madam Norton, the rules of the House severely limit my ability to impede your 5 minutes of opinion or his 5 minutes of opinion. I have cautioned members. I have made it very clear the witness will not be expected to answer any questions that are not on the narrow subject of Fast and Furious. Staff will show you the rules that limit how much I can stop.
Mr. Chairman, if I may say, it seems to me that interpretation of the rule was clearly not before us before, and I'm going to just have to ask, sure, if it's the right, it had been my view all along that a member may ask about what time it is on the moon in her 5 minutes. I'd never had a chairman before try to keep me from using my First Amendment rights. But since that had been your rule, and this isn't the first time you have invoked it, I tried to honor it. This gentleman
I thank the gentlelady for her comment. I have the ability to limit the scope of a hearing. I've tried to protect the Attorney General from answering questions which were not within the scope of his preparation. I respect the gentlelady's right to use her 5 minutes to state opinions, and I have never stopped somebody from it, although I've cautioned. It is the intent of this committee to keep this from being anything other than a legitimate investigation as to Fast and Furious and conditions that occurred around the investigation of a number of committees. So I appreciate the gentlelady's comment and would recognize for 10 seconds the gentleman from Ohio.
I just want to correct the record. It was suggesting that it was Bill Murray, not Tom Hanks, in Groundhog's Day. So I just want to make sure that you know I thought that you may have felt like Bill Murray in Groundhog's Day, not Tom Hanks.
I thank the gentleman, and for the record, it was 38 days in a row in which it repeated itself for Groundhog Day.
Well, Mr. Chairman?
I hope
I could
not.
just say one thing.
Yes, sir.
In response to Mr. Labrador.
Of course.
That was among the worst things I think I've ever seen in Congress. You took a whole series of statements out of context, with no context.
With all due respect, the worst thing I've ever seen.
The gentleman's time has expired.
And, you know, I was, the Mark Rich thing was considered in my confirmation. Talked about it then. There's a whole bunch of things that I could say about what you just did. And maybe this is the way you do things from, you know, in Idaho or wherever you're from. But understand something. What I've done, I'm proud of the work that I've done as Attorney General of the United States. And looked at fairly, I think that I've done, you know, a pretty good job. Have I been perfect? No. Have I made mistakes? Yes. Do I treat the members of this committee with respect? I always hope that I do. And what you have just done is, if nothing else, disrespectful. And if you don't like me, that's one thing. But you should respect the fact that I hold an office that is deserving of respect. And, you know, maybe you're new to this committee. I don't know. I don't know how long you've been here. But my hope would be that, you know, we can get beyond that kind of interaction, that kind of treatment of a witness, whether it's me or somebody else. Because I think in some ways what you did was fundamentally unfair, just not right.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the senior member of the committee from Pennsylvania, Mr. Platts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Certainly appreciate your efforts on this important issue. Mr. Attorney General, I guess first I just comment. Most of my line of questions have been addressed, asked, and answered, and I'm not going to repeat what others have already addressed. To the last exchanges, I guess I have two comments. For the most part, I agree with what you just said and consider the gentleman from Idaho a friend and don't share the approach in this instance that he took. And I think your points of a reminder of civility are important. Along with that, I also share the frustration I think that's coming through in his presentation or others on both sides of the aisle of that what this is all about is a courageous American who died in the line of service to this country, and that the actions of others in service to this country may have played a role because of mismanagement of a program or outrageous conduct relating to gun trafficking, and that we stay focused on that. The frustration is that apparently the Attorney or the Inspector General has thousands of pages of documents that this committee, in trying to do legitimate oversight, has not been privy to. And the sooner this committee on both sides of the aisle have access to the same information, the sooner the efforts of this committee can be achieved in a nonpartisan, just good government fashion. So I think we all need to keep the focus. This is about how do we make sure that the death of a servant of this nation never is repeated in the circumstances that we've seen here. So with my questions being asked and answered, I'm going to yield. I know the gentleman from South Carolina had some that he did not get to finish up, so I'm going to yield the balance of my time.
I want to thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania. I just want to circle back, Mr. Attorney General, with respect to the October 12, 2010 email, Mr. Weinstein and Mr. Trusty, and I'm happy to provide you a copy if you do not have one. You would agree with me that Fast and Furious is mentioned specifically in that email exchange? Could I ask that the clock be told, Mr. Chairman, while...
We'll suspend and we'll give him back the document again.
Okay. Yeah, I have it in front of me. This is October 17th. Well, I'm sorry, October 14th, October 17th, and October 16th. 18th.
That's correct. If you need time to familiarize yourself with it, take all the time you want.
That's fine. No, I'm okay.
Would you agree with me that Fast and Furious is mentioned specifically in that email exchange?
Yeah, on the, I guess this is the October 17th from Jason Weinstein to James Trusty.
And both of those gentlemen are Main Justice employees, correct?
That's right.
And you would agree with me that gun walking is mentioned specifically, correct?
Yes, in the second line, the number of guns that have walked.
Yes, sir. And it's actually mentioned in both the exchanges. Guns that have walked, and then somebody says gun walking. So that's two references to it. Now, can you find the phrase wide receiver anywhere in that email?
Well, I can't see this very well, but I'm going to just assume that, given the tenor of your question, that the term wide receiver does not appear in here. But Mr. Weinstein testified that when he was talking about a tricky case, he was referring to wide receiver in the Sunday, October 17th email.
And I can't speak to that, Mr. Attorney General. My point is this. Leading up to February 4th, a letter was being drafted, and I'm much more concerned with the name at the top of that letter than I am the name at the bottom. The name Department of Justice means something to me. The name at the bottom of it, not so much. While that letter was being drafted, there are people in Main Justice who knew the body of that letter was incorrect, factually incorrect. And while that letter was being drafted, the criminal chief, Lanny Brewer, was in Mexico talking about gun walking. Do you know whether or not he alerted our Mexican counterparts that Fast and Furious was something that they needed to be prepared to deal with because of the number of weapons? Did he at least mention to them, be alerted, a lot of weapons went down there, a lot of your civilians are going to be killed?
Well, first I'd say that, yeah, there were people in Main Justice who did have that knowledge of wide receiver and who admitted that they did not make the connection between wide receiver and Fast and Furious, and that should have happened, and it could have changed the February 4th letter. Lanny Brewer was not down there talking about gun walking, as we have used that term during the course of these last 4 hours or so, when he was dealing with the people in Mexico. And I remember the third question was what? I don't remember that.
I actually don't like interrupting witnesses, but I'm almost out of time. I want to read a summary, and this isn't my summary. This is from a DOJ attaché named Tony Garcia. The summary reads, Mr. Brewer suggested allowing straw purchasers crossing into Mexico so Mexican police can arrest and Mexican prosecutors can prosecute and convict. Mr. Garcia then wrote a summary saying what a horrible idea that was for the very reasons we've been talking about for the last hours, that people were going to die and that weapons were going to get away from us. So my time is out. I just want to ask one more question.
Very briefly.
Very briefly. Has there been discussion at Main Justice of either a grant of immunity to Mr. Cunningham so we can know what it is that he feels the need to invoke his Fifth Amendment right to not say? Have you discussed granting him immunity, and has there been a conversation about calling for a special prosecutor who may want to issue that grant of immunity?
We have not discussed immunity or a special prosecutor. I think that would be for you all to ask us if that is something that you want to have considered. I will say that, I don't know exactly why he invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege, but I can say that in the preparation of that February 4th letter that he was involved in, I don't have any basis to believe that he knowingly provided us with false information. But again, I don't know why he invoked his privilege. He has a lawyer from a very good law firm here in D.C., and I'm not sure why he did that.
Mr. Chairman,
the gentleman's time has expired.
Mr. Chairman, just 5 seconds.
Of course.
Just wanted to say to Mr. Gowdy, We've answered all your questions that you asked about Weinstein in our report, and it comes from documents that were during the testimony and before our staffs.
I thank the gentleman. We now go to the gentleman from Oklahoma, Mr. Lankford.
Mr. Attorney General, thank you for being here. The testimony is a long day, and you've dealt with this topic a lot. I know you also did not want to see the death of Brian Terry. No, none of us did. And this was a horrible incident that we're dealing with a lot of consequences of over time because we want to make sure it never happens again. We've heard loud and clear from you. You want to make sure this never happens again, and I appreciate that. What I want to do is talk briefly about ATF and the structure there. Obviously, this was an acting director. You have to have concerns, have extra there, to have extra attention to it in the management based on an acting director and the transitions and all that's happened with ATF on it. The structure with the FBI, and if they're going to go for an undercover operation, the field office proposal that goes through the supervisor in charge, goes to headquarters, it goes through legal. Then legal has got to determine is this entrapment, is this fully within the bounds of that. U.S. attorney may get involved in it at some point, and then it goes up to headquarters if it involves a certain amount of money and a length of time and such. So it has a very lengthy process getting all the way up to the Department of Justice on that. Is that a similar process to what ATF also does to be able to approve an operation like this undercover?
I'm not sure that it is as robust as what you have just described with regard to the FBI, but it is certainly.
But that is consistent with the FBI process. Is that correct?
I'm sorry.
Is that the right process for FBI that they go through?
I think the FBI process is a good one.
Okay, that's great.
And I think that what we need to do is have, not only with regard to ATF, but all the other investigative agencies within the Justice Department, make sure that we have similar procedures in place. It's one of the things that I've talked about with Todd Jones, the acting director, who's in the process of making changes at ATF.
Yeah, because that is the concern, obviously, to put in a system and structure to make sure this never, ever happens again. It's one thing to talk about it after the fact. It's another thing to try to fix it. And so it doesn't become such a bureaucratic maze that nothing happens, but it also makes sure there are some checks and balances, that we're not doing entrapment, that someone else is checking it, that it is getting up to your office. If it wasn't getting to your office of something like this before, let's try to make sure it does in the future days, get up to DOJ. So that is something in process. What is the time frame on that for a decision and a shift on that that's occurring?
You know, I mean, I would hope that this is something that we can do over a matter of a relatively short number of months. I think to do this right, we need to have buy-in from people who are at ATF headquarters, people who are in the field, so they have an ability to express their views, and so that they will accept these are things that are probably going to be changes in the way in which they have operated. So I think we're talking about a matter of months before we have those kinds of things in place. Again, Todd has already made really significant changes. He's working real hard at this, but I think the concern that you have expressed is one that I agree with. We should make sure that we have processes in place to minimize the possibility that what we are talking about today, and legitimately talking about today, ever happens again.
Right. The last thing I want to say to the Terry family at some point is this occurred and nothing's happened to make sure it never occurs again. That there's some way to be able to say this is never going to occur again as long as it's on any of our watch on it. Let me make a quick side statement that I'm going to yield back to the Chairman as well. This is not something I expect you to answer on it. It's a comment that I want to be able to make. It is off topic on it, so I'm going to tell you that. Yesterday, this committee had a hearing deal with the constitutional issues and the repercussions of the President's appointments to the NLRB and CFPB in January. Obviously, your Department is very involved in that, in the constitutional statement. In 2010, Deputy Solicitor General Neil Catel was before the Supreme Court, and Chief Justice Roberts asked him specifically, can the NLRB question be resolved with a recess appointment? Neil Catel at that time said
Mr. Chairman, it looks like there's another violation of your rule coming up.
The gentlelady is out of order.
I already prefaced it by saying I do not anticipate this. I'm making a statement about it. I do not expect the Attorney General to respond to this. So Neil Catel made this statement to the Supreme Court, saying that no, a recess appointment could not be done if it's less than 3 days. So there was an opinion by him on that before the Supreme Court dealing specifically with NLRB. 2 years later, Justice came back out and came out with a statement saying, no, that is legal. So there was a transition. Mr. Chairman, what I would hope for at some point is to be able to have some conversation to say what changed between 2010 and 2012 in justice, that at one point they considered it not legal, and 2 years later considered it legal and appropriate at that point. So obviously I'm not expecting you, that's not in your preparation on that, but that is something we just dealt with as a committee yesterday, and I would hope in some future day we would deal with.
Well, if I could just...
I thank the gentleman. There's no question there. Are you yielding to me?
I do yield back.
And I'll give you time for a quick close. The evidence that you've given us through discovery that on February 4th, Lanny Breuer was in fact talking about a program that included guns passing over the border in the hopes that they would be intercepted. Well, in fact, on March 10th, in the Cole email, there is a statement I'll read verbatim here. As I said on the call, to avoid any potential confusions, I want to reiterate the Department's policy, as though existing. We should not design or conduct undercover operations which include guns crossing the border. If we have knowledge that guns are about to cross the border, we must take immediate action to stop firearms from crossing the border, even if that permanently terminates or otherwise jeopardizes an investigation. That's a complete paragraph. Can you, in fact, answer for this committee how you have counseled or changed Lanny Breuer from a man who flew to Mexico and said, I want to have guns crossing the border, to this, which says there's a policy and it's wrong, and we've only got a month in between them?
Well, clearly what was proposed in, I guess, February by Lanny Breuer was in contravention of the policy that I had the Deputy Attorney General make clear to everybody at Main Justice and to the field. And to the extent that there is a tension, the policy that Mr. Cole has laid out is the policy of the Justice Department and is the thing that I support.
I want to thank you. And I'm not going to ask any more questions. You've been very generous with your time. I want to reiterate just one thing, and we can't undo everything that was said here. The effort was made for this to be narrowly about fast and furious. I believe that two other committees, Senate Judiciary, House Judiciary, had each one time in which the primary reason for you being called was not normal oversight, but in fact related to fast and furious and the letter that followed. We believe we've had one crack at it also, and we appreciate your coming 3 times to 3 separate committees, and that we appreciate. In closing, I do believe there are people at Main Justice who ultimately do need to go. If you are a political appointee, you should not be reassigned if you are in some way culpable in something like fast and furious. I have never accused you of having personal knowledge. This committee has never accused you of having personal knowledge. One of our members went on quite a bit about the alternative of either you knew or should have known. I share that in fact justice has to have a bubble-up system that holds specific people accountable for specific levels of action. This committee would hope, under our reorganization and organizational side, not our investigation side, that we can continue working with justice so that we can have a comfort level, along with the judiciary committees, that those systems are put into place so that in the future, if something like this happens, we know that, for example, a person signing a wiretap would also be a person who would understand the level of the operation being described in great detail, and you described it as this thick a document, and it often is. So I appreciate what you came here to do. This committee is obviously widely divided on details of Fast and Furious and the letter that followed. I said I'd let you have the last word, so Mr. Attorney General, you have the last word.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would just say that
would the gentleman suspend?
Just 30 seconds.
30 seconds, of course.
I just wanted to go back very quickly, Mr. Chairman, to something that Mr. Gowdy was asking about with regard to Mr. Weinstein, and I'm going to go, just wanted to make part of the record and of his transcript, page 121, where he says, okay, first of all, let me clear up the confusion that you noted about the pronouns. When I say it's a tricky case given the number of guns that have walked, I am talking exclusively about wide receiver. I just wanted to say that. I want to thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Thank you.
As we said, you have the last word, Mr. Attorney General.
Well,
briefly.
As I said, you and I talked before the hearing began, and I just want to say that you, the ranking member, the members of this committee have treated me fairly, with one exception, and one glaring exception. I've talked about that. The questions that you've asked have been tough. They've been fair. And I share, what was indicated, a desire to make sure that we have in place mechanisms so that the thing that brings us here today is something we will never have to discuss again. I think there are a variety of things that we can work on as people who are dedicated to the safety of the American people, and I look forward to working with the members of this committee across party lines to try to reach those kinds of, successfully reach those kinds of solutions.
I thank you, General Holder, and we stand adjourned.
Thank you.